He found his son, Hirschman. He was there when he was pulled out from underneath a beam. He was, I believe, unconscious, had a slight pulse. There's some reports that he begged his father to go take care of others instead of worrying about him. Basically, from what I could understand, he was removed to his father's house where he could look at. He was still alive, just had a weak pulse. But they knew that he wasn't in good shape. But there's a quote that's attributed to Dr. Wagerspack about, let us the dead alone and do what we can for the living. As the word spread downriver, Dr. Julius Fernandez came from Edgard. His wife and children were there, and he arrived on the scene as his daughter was pulled from underneath the rubble with a crushed skull. This obviously was very traumatic and shocking to him. Hold on, I just advanced one. But another child was pulled out, and it turned out that they weren't as severely injured. And so it's reported that he forgot his own troubles and did like Dr. Wagerspack and started ministering to the aid of others. The bodies were removed, and they said placed in caskets and moved to their respective homes. I'm assuming that somebody was building caskets shortly thereafter. I don't think they had a surplus around, but Father Fontaine apparently turned the rectory into a hospital since many of the injured could not be moved very far. And Dr. Wagerspack also opened his home up to a lot of the injured. His son Hirschman was moved to the back room of the house, and from what his daughter says, had never regained consciousness. He reportedly died of a broken neck, and she told her grandson Ben that if something like that would have happened today, there would have been enough time to get him to a hospital and possibly save him. But Dr. Wagerspack was also, she remembered he had worked on a steamer, and the reports in the paper was a PJ, and I know Jay had reported of Alain that he knew as an older man who had been struck down, I think, by the beams as well. And so, in addition, Roland Wagerspack had suffered a broken arm. He's noted as having worked the rest of the night and the afternoon ministering to those who were ill and sick, and really helped as many as he could and put others before himself. Eventually, those with minor injuries were sent home, and those who had suffered greatly were eventually sent down to New Orleans. And here's some of the pictures and information on the victims. Florence Fernandez is a picture. She was only 5 years old at the time. I tried to put in a little more information on the parents and just a little more general information. She was sister of Juanita Perret, the postmistress of Vacherie, from what I understand. Marie-Louise Trosclair was also 5. Her father was actually also a mail carrier. I don't have any pictures of her, and I don't really have a whole lot more information on her. And of course, Elia Wagerspack, daughter of Albert Florian Wagerspack. She and Stephen were married at St. John the Baptist Church. She was president of the Altar Society. She was a very devoted mother and helped her husband, they say, by economizing and, I guess, helping around, help him raise the money and save to join the family business. And he became part owner of the Laura plantation. And I think Jay had noted that her father had actually bought Laura in 1891 and divided it up amongst the 3 of his kids. Her brothers Raymond and Florian Raymond. And Raymond was my great-great-grandfather. And I think they shared the big house for a while, and Florian was often it's not the mother-in-law house, but the back house. And Raymond eventually, he ended up moving off, I think, in 1903 or 04. He was a very devout Catholic. As we noted earlier, member of the Holy Name Society and Knights of Columbus. And what I felt was also interesting here was that his mother died in 1922. His daughter's husband died in New Orleans in September 1923. And now, all of a sudden, a year later, 3 of the Haydel members were killed outright in this tornado. So this 1922-24 period of time is not a very good time period for this family. In addition, their son, Stephen Lewis Haydell Jr., was killed outright. He was a father of 5. He was there with 4 of his children. He was listed as overseer of the Wagaspack and Haydell plantation. Very active in the community with business and the school board. And apparently, from what I'm told, his wife stayed at Laura with their infant while he took the other 4 children to the fair. And when the tornado struck, he threw himself on top of the 4 of his children, with himself suffering, getting struck down. Then Birchman Wagaspack, Dr. Lionel Wagaspack's son, was talking about he was engaged. He was a druggist, I think. Not sure how long he'd been practicing. He was very young at that point, but he was a druggist for his father's practice. He was known as being very active in the church groups and societies and willing to lend a hand to help out the church. Very active in this fair. In fact, he was supposedly the lead role in the play that they were supposed to have that day as well. Let's see if we go back. If that will... Virginia Hubble, talked about her. She was born in 1894. Her father was Julius Hubble, who was Justice of the Peace for a time out there in St. James Parish in the 7th Ward. She was single. She was listed as a teacher in the 1920 census. And she was president of the Children of Mary Society. In fact, it's listed that the society members marched next to her casket in uniform, carrying the banner into the church and then out of the church to the cemetery. And then there's my great-grandfather, Arthur Hubble, Virginia's older brother. He was married to Eileen Wagaspack, in the St. Philip Church. And what I was trying to show a lot of these things is that these people were married, baptized, or children were baptized, all in this same St. Philip Church a lot for me, because this was around from 1879 to 1924. So this was a very integral part of their lifestyle. So, probably one of the places they were most comfortable and safe, if you think about it. He was the manager of the Wagaspack and Haydell store, which ended up becoming the Hubble and Wagaspack store later on. There's some quotes attributed to him as being a man to know him was to love him, and he met death like he met every day of his life with a smile on his face, which I've always found interesting. He apparently, even in the casket, when the beam hit him, he was smiling, they say. And in the casket, he was smiling as well. And he was said to be also very devout and a member of the various religious groups. And all those folks died at the storm itself. And there was one further death that occurred 3 days later, Belfour Haydell, Stephen's younger brother. And I'm trying to find out more information on him. If you look at the census information, they just show that he really never had an occupation listed, and he apparently lived with his mother all of his life. And I'm assuming he moved in with Stephen afterward. So I'm not sure what he did and whether he was invalid in some way or what. And here's a typical death certificate. I ordered all the death certificates. Dr. Wagaspack did all the, I think it was a coroner too at the time, and he listed the cause of death as accidental death by collapse of building, or parentheses being crushed. Its contributing factor was a windstorm. And if all the other death certificates pretty much look the same other than the personal information. As I said, in addition to the 9 that were killed outright, there were a lot that were seriously injured. There was Marie Haydell, Bro, who was another daughter of Stephen and Delia. She was reported so seriously injured they didn't expect her to live through the next day. And as you can see by the dates, she lived until 1977. And they quoted her as saying, she wasn't aware what had happened, and she was asking, why don't Mom and Dad come? She had been moved to the rectory to be taken care of. Her brother, Albert Joseph, as well, was seriously injured too. He was believed to have a broken back and was also listed as having a broken spine and suffered, I think, a broken arm and internal injuries. So he was obviously had suffered greatly from this as well. But he apparently survived as well. There was a Willie Joseph email listed as well. Now, basically what I could find here was all based on either draft cards from World War I or census records. Didn't really have a whole lot. He had survived. And then on the Simon branch, what I could pull up on Prudent Joseph, his parents, he had 8 children at the time. And it was actually listed in the paper as a PJ Simon. So I'm assuming it was either him, but he also had a son. So I don't know whether it could have been his son that was injured seriously.
With his granddaughters and
Okay.
Mary Alice, which one was it?
Do you remember who was?
Yeah, I remember. That's my grandfather.
It was him who was injured.
No, I didn't know if he was injured. It was my uncle that was injured.
Arland, there was several brothers. Arland, they was all there. Arland was injured because he walked with a crippled leg the rest of his life.
Yeah, his leg
His
leg got infected from something falling on his leg.
It could also be very well that the newspapers
He
got
was
the name
there.
wrong.
He was there.
Right. But they could have either got the name wrong somehow or son of PJ, and they just went with that. But like I said, other than what Jay had said, I couldn't really find anything. But like I said, one of them was supposedly, well, once again, assuming the paper was talking about the right person, wasn't expected to make it through the night. There's also Jean Edmund Wagesback, which I think he survived. I just couldn't find a death date for him, but he was injured as well. But interesting enough, I think he was listed in his World War I draft. Information has already having been crippled and disabled with the legs. And I think he was a barber, but he supposedly had fractured an arm. Neely Bro, I couldn't find anything at all on her. And then there was listed a Mrs. Omer Wagesback, which, based on putting the information together, appeared to be an Eileen Saungy, daughter of Alfred and Louise. Her husband would have been the nephew of Eli Wagesback Adele. Once again, the newspaper talked about a Mrs. Frank Abney, which this is the closest I could come up with Florentine Naomi Wagesback. I was talking to, I think many of y'all have heard of Susan Laurent, who's a member of the group. She and I were talking last week. She wasn't aware, that's where I got a picture from, that she had been injured. They may have married later in life, but I think according to what I had on the marriage years, marriage records, that would have fit about the time frame that she was married. So I'm assuming that she was the Mrs. Frank Abney we're talking about. And then they also listed Annette Gaudin. And if you look at the 3 or 4 different newspapers that came out in the reports, some of them had listed a handful of names, some of them listed another handful of names. So I'm just trying to compile them all as best possible. And then the same thing, they listed Philomene Himel, but they didn't list it as a Mrs. So-and-so Himel. And I couldn't find one that was just Philomene Himel at the time. So this is the closest I've got. Listed at, not as a Mrs. Henry Himel, but she was from St. Philip area in St. James Parish. Others injured, we know Roland Wagesback had a fractured arm. Jean Melanie Godet Wagesback had jumped to safety out of the window and broke her arm. Marie Clabert Wagesback had a bleeding leg. Her daughter was the one who reported the singing of the song. And she was a long-time St. James high school teacher. And then apparently some Mrs. Brown in New Orleans, which I don't have any hopes of finding Mrs. Brown in New Orleans. Yeah, that'd be now, that's all the events that happened at the storm, but it wasn't over at that point, because now we still had to worry about the funeral and all. So bodies were placed in caskets, possibly cypress, and moved to the homes by dusk. Funeral wakes, we know, Jay was telling me that they had one at Lar for 4 of the victims. We know that Stephen Haydell Jr. had a vigil at St. Joseph Plantation. And according to the newspapers and all, Florence Fernandez's body was taken to her uncle's house. I saw one listing of Gretna and one of Harvey.